Hello there and welcome back to Does It Hold Up, a series where we look at games and compare them to their modern counterparts. This time it's for Snatcher, a Konami visual novel game from the mind of Hideo Kojima, creator of the Metal Gear franchise. So is this visual novel game a thinker or a stinker? Let's get into the premise, shall we? Snatcher takes place in the year 2047 on the island of Neo Kobe, with you taking control of Gillian Seed, a man who has no memory. Yep, it's one of those stories. And has come to the city to become a junker, in the hopes of regaining his lost past. So there is a lot to unpack from that synopsis. This game is full of tasty jargon for us to get our teeth into, so let's break it down into bite-sized chunks if we can. Neo Kobe is a city in Japan, and bears a striking resemblance to Los Angeles from the movie Blade Runner. And by striking, I mean a blatant rip-off. Get used to that, by the way. Gillian Seed was picked up by the Siberian military force 3 years ago, that's 2044 for those of you not paying attention, with his wife Jamie, both of whom have no memories of anything prior. Gillian gets kicked to the curb by his wife since they have nothing to base a marriage around, and so our man starts training with the military and gets sent to Neo Kobe to become a junker. A junker is basically a police investigator that deals with snatchers, robots that are essentially Terminators who go around replacing people for an unknown purpose and who are almost indistinguishable from real humans. Remember the Blade Runner reference I mentioned before? Because if you have seen that movie, a lot of cogs are going to be snapping into place for you right about now. This game wants so hard to be an official Harrison Ford game you wouldn't believe, and it did it 9 years before Westwood Studios would take a crack at their own official Blade Runner game. By the way, if you haven't seen the original Blade Runner movie, go watch it. Stop this, go watch it. I don't care if you haven't got 2 hours to watch a movie, do it. You'll thank me later. Okay, let's continue. You play Gillian, a smooth-talking cop in a trench coat wandering around a future city looking for Arnold Schwarzenegger's cousins so you can end-of-line them with your massive cannon. If that sounds fun to you, good. It was for me too. I enjoyed the story a lot in this game. It holds up very well, in an 80s action thriller kind of way. And whilst there are a few self-aware comedy lines that I'm not really a fan of, almost all of the dialogue was well written and well executed when it was voiced in certain sequences. With one exception. The character Katrina must have some dirt on the execs at Konami, or there was some nepotism going on, because her performance was at best elementary level. I mean, I watched Bluey with my daughter, and the kids in that seemed Academy-worthy compared to this dog pile.
Oh, Mr. Seed, I appreciate your feelings, but I was always ready for the worst with my father. Every day as I watched him leave for work, will it be today, tomorrow? I knew it was a dangerous job.
Compared to that, though, the music and score is a breath of fresh air? Not fresh, but with a TV dinner aftertaste, the kind that you know is bad for you, but you want it anyway. It's trash. But it's the best kind of trash. 80s TV trash. When you start the game, there's a breakdown of what happened to the world that let it get to this state. Some biological warfare happened, which frankly is unbelievable. As if a deadly virus would result in the world being turned upside down. Inconceivable, right? Anyway, after that, you're shown Neo Kobe, a quick scene between Gillian and his estranged wife Jamie, who also lives there, for reasons. And after that, your Blade Runner flying car takes you away and you're shown a backdrop of the city, whilst the credits roll and frankly, sexual jazz starts to play, reminding you that at the time and place Snatcher was made, Columbo was still on TV solving crimes and breaking hearts, and people knew that saxophones were the greatest instrument available to mankind. Speaking of when the game was made, Snatcher went through a whole bunch of revisions before making its way over here on the Mega CD in 1994, providing us with the only way to play this game in English, even now. Of course, because it was a very limited release and hasn't been remade for any modern consoles since, it has become somewhat of a collector's item, bringing me to a big issue in this review. I had to emulate it. I normally try not to emulate games, but with a retail for secondhand copies being anywhere between $500 and $1,000, I either have to work really hard to make my YouTube channel profitable, or I could scan the dark web and convene with evil forces to help me. So I sold my soul and I got to play. Yes! And how do you play? I hear you type mysteriously through a time paradox, for this is a visual novel. As such, these games can sometimes literally just involve clicking to move the story forwards like a book. Well, Snatcher isn't like that. Here, the gameplay is presented to you in a few different ways, with the majority of it taking place in a pseudo first-person perspective, looking out at the landscape and given the option to interact with several items of interest. You then have to fiddle with these using your logic, or in my case, fire everything! Until I come across the right combination that the game needed me to progress. For the majority of the game, Snatcher does an admirable job of sticking to what I would describe as logic puzzles. I followed what was required of me to progress in maybe 90% of the scenarios, with only a few times where I struggled with the concepts. Luckily for me, it isn't possible to hit a game over screen during these sections of the story. Those can only occur during these shooting sections. You remember me say about Gillian's massive cannon? Well, in Snatcher you actually put it to good use. Several times, in fact. During these shooting sections, which can jump out at you if you're not prepared, you're asked to press A to draw your weapon and move your crosshairs through a 9x9 grid before firing. While some of these points are fine, they're honestly the weakest part of the game, with the corners of the grid being hard to actually make the gun fire in them, leading you to take more hits than I felt like I should. I also feel like they're a bit of a lie. The game takes great lengths to tell you that the two types of enemies that you will face, the Snatchers and the smaller, nimbler Insectors, the Snatchers are by far the more deadly adversary. The reverse was true for me though. I didn't fail a single encounter with the human-like robot attacks, but I died several times to the Insectors, who would dive around the screen very quickly for the poor controls to keep up with, especially with the issue I was having with the corners of the firing grid. One section right at the end of the game in particular was incredibly frustrating, causing me to smash my fist on my desk so hard it turned on double speed, which weirdly enough didn't help me complete it. Fortunately, the shooting sections in the game aren't prolific. There are perhaps less than 10 of them in the game. Much more fun with the puzzles. Snatcher also features a few brain teasers for you to figure out along the way, with some other sections where characters would ask for passwords and information you should already have been given to make sure that you're paying attention. If you don't know what kind of birthmark Katrina has or what the Chief's favourite slushy flavour is, then you need to go look it up on Junker HQ's own master computer, Jordan, to progress the game. Jordan is like the librarian for the game's information, with a glossary of the world's history over the last 50 years, but also with a detailed dossier on all the characters in the game, with a few exceptions that I won't spoil here. So you use our Duncan friend here to get information, but you also have to use him to construct a profile, or montage as the game refers to it, of a suspect in your investigation. This section gave me some trouble, and I ended up looking up for the answer, because either I suck, or the hints I were given were too vague. I'll leave that to you to decide. It's a shame because I wanted to like this section a lot more than I did, and the other puzzles in the game were fun to figure out. I wonder if the Japanese versions were easier to figure out and maybe it was a translation issue. Either way, this cool section ended up just being frustrating, which was a bummer. Overall, the gameplay for Snatcher was still very much enjoyable, albeit frustrating at times. But honestly, I find that with most visual novel games. I think it's hard to always be in sync with what they want from you. I would now like to talk about the graphics used in Snatcher. I've said in the past that these should have little bearing when making comparisons, and granted I haven't actually made any direct comparisons to other visual novels I've consumed yet. We'll do those next, okay? But right now, I want to talk about what you're looking at right here, since the graphical look of a visual novel makes up a greater percentage of the overall product than normal games do. And I think Konami's art team did a great job evoking such a vibrant world, especially when you take into account that we're still dealing with what is essentially a souped up Mega Drive with a Discman thrown onto it. Many of the locations are well thought out, with most of the objects of interest that the player interacts with being plainly visible in shot, or coming into shot when needed. Some of these incoming smaller cuts lose some fidelity due to the technology, but I think they do the job well enough not to be a bother. The game also isn't afraid to pull tight camera shots of some frankly gruesome details, with heads being removed and guts everywhere. I'm surprised that the game came with a 13+ rating back in '94, when movies were still struggling to get a 15 rating for much less at the time. When they aren't getting cut to pieces, the character designs are very nice. I can tell that they basically designed Gillian to be Decker from Blade Runner, and later on Sting makes an appearance from his role in Dune. I should also mention that since this is a Hideo Kojima game, of course there's going to be a Metal Gear reference. Well, there is. This guy, who serves as your mobile phone basically, is called literally Metal Gear. Subtle, right? They also aren't afraid to draw ordinary looking characters or unappealing ones. So many games these days are just filled with fashion models because everyone in this made up world has to look perfect, which is boring. The real world is full of weird and ordinary looking guys. I mean, there's one right here. And Konami wasn't afraid to put some in their game, which is nice. What isn't nice though, is how women are portrayed in this game. The "here we go again" meme plays in my head whenever a woman is introduced to Gillian, who seems incapable of seeing a woman as being more than an object put there for his titillation and to perv over. This is made worse by the fact that you're given options to actually flirt with these women and basically creep them out as much as possible. As much as I enjoy the character designs from the male perspective, I feel inversely disappointed by the portrayal of females in Snatcher, leaving me with mixed feelings overall about the game's presentation. I'm beginning to understand why the game has never been re-released. Adding caveats to my thoughts on the game is a massive shame. That rhymes. Because if the women in the game had just been treated with a little bit more care and respect, I would actually recommend playing the game to almost anyone. In terms of how I feel about the game in comparison to others though, Snatcher has one of, if not the best story I've played in a visual novel. I'm a sucker for sci-fi, and this one hit all my buttons, beating out my previous favourites of Fate Stay Night and Doki Doki Literature Club. I honestly haven't played that many of these games, and I would appreciate some suggestions in the comments. The game controlled well enough for me to continue to enjoy it throughout its short runtime of under 10 hours, and its concepts were easy to understand for most of the time, leading to little frustration on my part. The music had some great scores, especially during the game's opening credits. I always need good sax music to listen to. Overall, while I am torn on Snatcher, I want to say it holds up, and for 90% of it, it does. Its sexist views don't belong in the world anymore, but everything else about it should be observed and enjoyed, just like me and this ice cream. I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. Ciao. Oh my god, that's horrible. Ugh. Ugh. Ugh.